I was born on the 29th of July 1936 in Paris, France. My parents originally came from Poland to France in the 1920s when my father was about 21. When the war started, I was 3 years old, and I have almost no recollection whatsoever until the bomb started to fall on Paris. I remember that the war did not really touch me until maybe I was 4.5, 5 in 1940. I think I was queuing on the footpath outside a bread shop to buy our bread for lunch when there was a few people in a queue. And one of my friends from school, he was approximately my age too, maybe 4.5, 5, called me a dirty Jew in French. And I remember that it didn't affect me one bit. When I got my bread, I went home to my mother and I asked my mother, in actual fact, what is a Jew? I had no idea. I believe that my mother she kept a tradition and she kept a kosher home. But my father was a socialist, a member of the trade unions, and he had little time for religion. My sister was about 11, 12 years older than me. Sometime during 1941, 42, my mother, before she was arrested, had explained to me that I should not speak Yiddish anymore. And at around about that same time, in July 42, the German administration in Paris directed that all Jews should wear a yellow star, and you had to pay for it, you had to buy it in actual fact. And the kids aged above the age of 6 had to wear it. And I turned 6 in July 1942, and I believe this is the star I had to wear. And eventually, when we decided to hide from the German, someone took it off my clothes, but you can still see the stitching on the edge of the yellow star. The first arrestations of Jews started in 1941 in Paris, and my father apparently was on a list supplied by the German to the local police authorities, and one day one of the inspectors of police from the local police station got in touch with my father and told him that he had my father's name on his list and he was meant to arrest him in the next couple of days. My father took the hint and drove off in a car to the south of France. And when the police came to arrest him, he wasn't home. After a few days away from Paris, my father came back to Paris. It was safe to do so at the time, but the arrestation continued, and eventually my father realized that things were getting very hot for him there, and he decided that he would find some way to get out of Paris. And my father immediately drove away from Paris with a car. And he drove very close to Spain, and he left the car there in a farmhouse. Eventually, my father found his way back to Lyon. My mother and my sister and I were still in Paris at the time. It was July 1942. And my mother decided that she would join my father in the south of France in the unoccupied zone with my sister, but it would be too dangerous to take me with them. I was only 5 when I did. So she left me with my grandparents. And she took off with my sister by train with the help of a French inspector of police, another one, that was being paid to help them cross the demarcation line. In fact, that French inspector betrayed them at the border of the demarcation line, and the German police arrested my mother and my sister. And they were taken to a camp of internment, they called it, called Lyon. From Lyon, after a few days, they were transferred to the major transit camp outside Paris called Drancy. My mother had already apparently suffered the consequences of being betrayed by the first inspector of police, who denounced her at the border, did not trust these two police officers, refused to go with them. My father was outside Drancy, beyond the barbed wire, and he could see from a distance what was happening there. He couldn't hear, but he could see that my mother was shaking her head and saying no. And he could also see that my sister, who at that time was 17, 18, was in fact saying yes from a distance. Didn't work. My mother and my sister stayed in Drancy. On the 14th of September, my mother and my sister were put on a convoy number 32, which left Drancy, destination Auschwitz. They arrived in Auschwitz on the 16th of September 1942. I believe that both of them were selected at the ramp to work or live, and my mother in fact survived until 1944. But I understand that my sister did not survive more than a couple of days. She was in fact chosen to work in the German brothel inside Auschwitz. And when she discovered what that building was, she apparently ran out from the building. The German soldiers around the building had dogs, German Shepherd dogs, and they launched the dogs at her, and she was killed by the dogs outside the barrack where the brothel was. There was an eyewitness to that event, Mr. Feigenbaum, who was a friend of my father, and told my father the story after the war in 1945-46, when he himself came back from Auschwitz. Sometime in September, October 1942, my father knew that my mother and my sister had disappeared somewhere east, and he arranged for me to be taken from my grandparents to join him in the south of France in an unoccupied zone. And he made an arrangement with a special person to come there, pick me up and take me back. And that person was called a passeur, and in fact he did it successfully. And a lady that came to visit me at my grandparents' place too heard what was happening, and she convinced my grandfather to let her come with me through the demarcation line. This lady was called Simone, and she in fact traveled with me at night and the passeur, and we successfully crossed the demarcation line. During our stay there, I was in a waiting room with maybe 50, 60 other people. At one stage, I was taken out of that waiting room, and I was taken to see somebody sitting in an office beyond a desk. It was a long, narrow office. The desk was right at the end. And as I entered the room, the man beyond the desk waved me to come closer and closer and closer. And on the right-hand side, I saw my father was sitting very rigidly on a chair to the side. I went up to the desk, and the man offered me a lolly from a box of lollies he had on his desk, and I refused the lolly. Apparently, it made my father very happy that I had not taken the lolly, he told me afterwards. I was taken back to the waiting room, and I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing I remember is that a lady woke me up, and she scooped me up. I was asleep on a sideboard in the waiting room. The lady who woke me up, in fact, had been arrested with us the previous morning in the same building, and she had her two daughters with her, aged maybe 8 and 10 or 9 and 11. And this lady had convinced the Gestapo that she was not Jewish. When she saw me in a waiting room, she realized that I wasn't going to be released, so she scooped me up and she walked out with me, risking her life and her daughter's life. As we walked out of the building, she was still carrying me, and she was walking very quickly. There was a small city square in front of that building. She quickly crossed the city square and turned the first corner, and there we found there was another lady waiting, who asked that lady who was carrying me, "Is that John?" And the lady said, "It is. Do you want him?" I remember these words, "Do you want him?" And the lady said, "Yes, I'll take him." And this lady was Simone, who had come across from Paris with me and crossed the demarcation line at night. My father was trying to make an arrangement for her to stay there because it was high up in the mountain, and it was felt it was safe because if the police came up the mountain or the German came up the mountain, you could hear the car a mile away, and you had time to get out of the house and go and hide in the forest. And we spent a bit of time together in a little place called Murat-le-Caire, and there I was living under an assumed name, and I went to school there. My false name was Jean Pastaillan, and I was deemed to be of Armenian origin. My father was meant to be a returned prisoner of war. In fact, he was a member of the underground in Murat-le-Caire. I went to school there for a few months, and I also went to the local church every Sunday, and I learned to be a good Catholic. During the following 2 years, I had to live under that false name. It was quite difficult at school because at roll call, I often, when I heard that name called out, it did not register, and I did not know that the teacher was calling me. And I must have complained to my father some time later, and he must have told his brother, and my uncle suddenly arranged for a gold ring to be made with my initial JP, and he said, when the roll call is made, always look at your finger and you'll remember your name. And that trick worked, and I didn't forget my name. One of the problems that I had at the same time, that I was passing myself off as a French Catholic, was that I could not go to the toilet with the other boys because I was the only person circumcised probably there. And my father explained to me that it was sudden death. If I showed myself to other boys, they would know I was Jewish. So I was not allowed to go to the toilet with the other boys, and I always had to go into a cubicle, never being able to do the same as the other boys did when they brought their names in the snow. I couldn't do it, and I felt very, very jealous of them. The false identity was like a game for me, and I had to meet the requirement of that game, play the game according to the rules, and I was not conscious of anything except we had to defeat the German. That's all the consciousness I had during that time, that it was not so hard to play the part of a non-Jew, but it was very hard to be able to fight the Germans. This I was so conscious to this day. I'm jealous of anybody who was 16, 17, 18, when actual fact could join the underground and could help to liberate France from the Germans. Sometime in August 1944, my father decided to go back to Paris with me with the underground in the back of a truck. The idea was to liberate Paris before the Allies arrived in Paris. And Paris was liberated in August 1944, and I was just there with my father. We lived in our original apartment, but I remember spending hours walking the street, looking at women's faces, hoping that one of them would be my mother coming back from wherever she had been. At the time, I did not know where she had been taken to. I knew that she had disappeared with my sister. I had, at the time, no recollection of what my mother looked like. The last time I saw her, I was 5, 6. To this day, I don't have a picture of my mother in my head, nor of my sister for that matter. I spent literally 2 or 3 years looking at women's faces in the street on every occasion I could. My father left decided to leave Paris in 1952, and we came to Australia originally for business reasons. My father decided that this was the place to stay. He had lost his daughter in a war. He didn't want to lose me fighting a war for the French in Vietnam and then in Algeria. So he decided we'll stay here. Young because this is a place where I felt I had a duty to be, to make sure that all the people that died were remembered the right way for the right reason, and to make sure that the trauma that we went through and the victims went through was used for a constructive purpose, and to make sure that it would not happen again.